Okay. Let me check to make sure it's all working before. Oh yeah. Right. Okay. So I don't know if you'll remember the first part one of the Nations in Prophecy. We went through quite a few, quite a number of slides that start right back into the sons of Noah. We got three sons of Noah. We got Shem, Japheth, and Ham. So they all have children, and they all scatter throughout the Middle East region and further up to Europe, and that's mainly, particularly talking about Japheth. His children, they sort of migrate towards that area, but particularly in the Middle East, we got Ham and Shem. The majority of their sons, they were actually living in there, and their descendants. Obviously after the flood, and for quite a long length of time, we got obviously we got the children of Israel was born, and they form as a nation. So they were the descendants of obviously Abraham, and Abraham traces back his descendant. He was a descendant line from Shem, and we see that the moment that the children of Israel enter Jericho, they had to go through quite a few obstacles, didn't they? They have to go through to fight against the enemies and so on, the Amalekites, and before they enter Jericho. But when they were there, the descendants of, before they enter in there, the descendants of Ham, the sons of Ham, we got the Canaanites, the Amorites, all these other, the Gerishites and all these other rights. They were living in there for many, many years. And then they have to push them out, of course, led by Joshua, and eventually they take control of the land. And but we see that the threat that Israel has to face throughout all of this time, it's an ongoing situation, and even right until today. So we see that it's all these people, their movement, the children of Noah and their descendants, and obviously we see the nation of Israel was born, and but all these other nations that actually dwell outside Palestine on the time, they will all come from the descendants of all these other people, as well as through the children of Aram, the children of Elam, the children of all these. So we see that they all come from one line. They all come from the branch of Noah, but they end up fighting for themselves for a long length of time. So that was, we actually talk about briefly, and where they migrate and the nation they identify with and so on. But what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look in Ishmael and Isaac. So we actually looking at their descendants and their children and so on. And likewise also the movement of their descendants as well. So as you can see, we got Abraham. Abraham was promised that he was the father of many nations. And that in itself, it's also included of his second marriage. Second marriage, his children that was born from his second wife, Keturah. He also had 6 sons from the second marriage. And when God spoke about that his the descendants of Abraham will be blessed, and that blessing was also poured out to them as well, not just Isaac, but also pour out also to Ishmael as well. But by the way, we often talk about the line of Isaac and Jacob and Israel and so on, right down to Joseph and the 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. But we rarely touch about Ishmael. Ishmael, the Bible God does says that he will also make him great as well. And there will also tall prince come out of it. And he will also multiply as well and fill up, the earth. And that relates to we see that right across the Middle East. we can identify easily, they were the descendants of Ishmael. For many generations have come and go. We see that how the prophecy fulfilled in terms of Ishmael itself, just like with the same blessing that God blesses Isaac and their descendants, talking about Israel. So we see here we got Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac, and we got Esau and the brother of Jacob. And Esau, one of his wives, was actually an Ishmaelite or related to Ishmael. And but we see that Esau always dwelling down south, and they're also one of the biggest enemy of Israel. Also, they're all brethren, but they all seems to be not getting on well together. Not just like we heard the story of of Jacob and Esau and or Isaac and Ishmael, that they're not getting on well together as well. But we see that all their descendants, they don't seem to get on all together throughout the history. And so it says in Genesis chapter 21, this is the continuation of the blessing that was mentioned in Genesis chapter 17, repeated in Genesis 21. And this is talking to Ishmael. This is the Lord appeared to Ishmael's mother because they were sent out by Abraham, and because Isaac was quite a young lad, but they have quite a number of years apart. I think Ishmael was about in his late. I think he was a teenage, or somewhere around 18 and 20 when Isaac was born. And as Isaac grew up, they don't seem to get on well together, and then they were sent away because Sarah wasn't really happy the way that how they get on with things. And so Abraham sent them out, and they were stuck in the middle of the desert, him and his mother Hagar. And the Lord repeated the blessing here to Ishmael, and he said, I will make him a great nation. Now, if you're familiar of the book of Genesis, it talks about that his children, he had also had 12 sons, and they represent 12 princes. And eventually they also represent, become very powerful as well as, and they seems to be locating right close to the land of Canaan. And as you can see there on the very top part of the north part of Saudi Arabia, right close to the border of Israel. And that's where they believe to be living around the area. And likewise also the other sons of Abraham from his second wife, they're also very much living in this area. And then by this time, when they were living here, the descendants of Shem, for many generations back then, they were also living around here as well. But they become to take control of all these areas and so on. And they flourish as well as. So that's what we can see. It's just the basic movement of the descendant of Ishmael, and just like what God have actually spoken to him, that he will make him also a great nation and multiply as well as. We're going to fast forward a bit in the time of these. There's quite a huge amount of quite a number of empires. We got the Babylonian Empire, we got the Persian Empire, we got the Greek Empire. They take control of Israel, and but there was after the time of the Roman Empire, there was also the Arabs, or the Arab Empire before the Ottoman. But between the time period of the Arabs and the Ottoman, there was the Crusades. They push out the Arabs, and they take control of Jerusalem for quite some time before the time of the Ottoman. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this, because there's a scripture here in Leviticus chapter 26, in verse 25, and I will bring a sword upon you that shall avenge the quarrel of my covenant. This is speaking to Israel. And when ye gather together with your cities, I will send a pestilence among you, and ye shall be delivered into the hand of thy enemy. So it's very clear of how Israel as a nation, they've been ruled by the Gentile or the enemies, which is of course the Babylonians, the Greek, the Persian, and likewise also in the time of Judges, there was a time called the Moabites. Obviously, the Moabites, they were the sons of Lot, and the Ammonites. They do take control also of Israel from now and again, and the Edomites were sort of putting a lot of pressure as well. That's as far as what we can read in the scriptures. And then we see these huge empires coming in and invade Israel, and they take control of it and for quite a long length of time. And here, as you can see here, this is the Arab Empire. I don't know if you're familiar with the book of Revelation, chapter 9, where it talks about the rise of the locusts. It talks about this movement, the locusts coming in and conquer and take control of all these areas, was began by Muhammad. And Muhammad was the one who came to power and bring in the religion of Islam. And on the time, the Arabs were dwelling on this area for quite a long length of time. So when we're talking about the Arabs, we're talking about the race of people. Some people think the Turks, they were the Arabs. The Turks, they were not the Arabs. And likewise, also the Iranians. The Iranians are not the Arabs, but obviously we look up into that on the presentation for part 3. But the Islam is a religion of the Middle East nation. It started by Muhammad in 612 AD, and he takes this religion and conquer, and the Arabs move all over the place, just like what the Bible says in Leviticus. It also applies for nation as such, like the Arabs have taken control in Israel because of the disobedience of God's people, and God has to allow this to happen. One of the interesting things of all these empires that come and go, the began of Nebuchadnezzar, they seems to be taking control of Israel, but all of them, of course, none of them take control of the whole land of Saudi Arabia. So if you're familiar with all these empires, the Greeks and the Romans, they all seems to be sort of dwelling on the north part of Africa and the coast of Europe, and when Nebuchadnezzar came in, his empire wasn't reached further out to Bulgaria, to sort of approach Europe. It was just mainly the region of Persia and a little bit of Turkey, but he wasn't that big either. But he, it's just sort of coming into the edge of Saudi Arabia. So all these empires doesn't conquer the whole nation of Saudi Arabia. There may be a reason why, but maybe perhaps because God was in control. It may be, but the nations and the people that actually take control of it, obviously the Arabs, because it belongs to the Arabs, just like God have actually promised to Ishmael. And that might be the reason why. I mean, for all this long length of time, some of the things we might question: what happened to the Jews? We know that the Jews, they got taken away by Nebuchadnezzar, and quite a huge number of them, they returned back to rebuild the temple during the time of Cyrus, the Persian. But a lot of them, they get mingled through the Arab nations and a mixture of people. They've been living around here for many, many years, but they still have to keep their religion as a Jew. They were ruled by the Arabs, they were ruled by the Romans, they were ruled by all these other empires, but they were allowed to do their religion and all these other things, except the Arabs. The Arabs, they told the Jews, if you don't convert as a Muslim, you will be killed, because you can look it up in the history of that. That's how wild they are. That's how cruel they are. When they were in power in 636 36 AD to 1099, around about 450 years, they were in control. As I said, rarely we touch about Ishmael and their descendants and how they, come and go and so on. We often hear about the Romans, and just like what the book of Daniel talks about, this man made of metal. But as I said, it's rare to touch about Ishmael and their descendants and what happened to them and so on. So we're going to bring you back here in the time of Israel. The division of the two tribes. We got the northern house, which is Israel, and we got the southern house called Judah. And obviously it was begun by Solomon, of course, of his idolatry. King Solomon was, we know that he asked for wisdom and judgment and justice, and the Lord gave him all these things. But the other thing with Solomon was, because of his pride, he ended up falling in love with all these women. I think it was about 700 wives and 300 concubines, and they all mixed race women. And there were Moabites, there were the Edomites, and this is what the Lord hates. And that's how his downfall and leads to the divided kingdom of Israel. It was the biggest thing, but guess what? Israel neighbors, they were just mocking them for what they did, because they knew that was, that Israel always can be very easily deceived, because they mess up the law, they mess up the covenant, and they knew that it's very easy for they themselves as an enemy knocks their neighbor, they can come and take control over them. And that's what we can always see in the Bible, throughout the book of Kings and so on, of how they behave, and God has to allow this and that, and allowing all these other nations to rule over them and take control of their land and invade them, and the things we can see in the scriptures. Now, one of the things that the Lord said also to Ishmael, he says here in Isaiah chapter 21, he says, "For thus hath the Lord said unto me, within a year, according to the years of our hireling, and all the glory of Kedar, which is the eldest son, or the second eldest son of Ishmael, which is the Ishmaelite, speaking to the Ishmaelites, shall fail." So no wonder why, when the Arabs take control of Israel on the time, their mission is to rule Israel for the rest of their entire life, but they didn't. We see that for many wars have come and go throughout the time. We see the crisis in the Middle East and so on. The Arabs always keep pushing and pushing. They never give up, because they still see the land of the Palestine, was their land, because they still see that Ishmael was the eldest son of Abraham, and therefore they have the right to take it. And that's the motivation behind it. And so there is a lot of things that connects it here, but God did say that they won't take it. He given to Jacob, and it will belong to Jacob, and obviously through his descendants. And we see that many events that happen, the Jews has returned, and they take control back the land, because God did say that. So we see that according to prophecy, that doesn't matter how hard they try, or how powerful they are to try to push the Jews out, is never going to work, because God have actually said it in concrete for a reason. Because the covenant was given to Isaac, but not Ishmael. A covenant was given to Isaac and Jacob, and then through the two sons of Joseph, and then likewise also it goes down on that on that line. I mean, obviously we talk about the birthright and so on. The birthright is always God given to the eldest son. The eldest son of talking about Israel. But perhaps that's where they come from. That's where the Arabs come from. They knew what it was. They knew what the blessing was, and so on. But it sounds like they wanna take control, as we see in the world today. The world today, we see that according to what we see in the scriptures and the way we our faith and the way we read the Bible, and it's quite a fascinating thing that we are the only one we understand to identify clearly the basic structure of Bible prophecy, and to identify nations in the world. So we see that if you see in the map, you see all this kingdom here in red, they are the Arabs. Okay, the Nabattu tribes was believed to be the descendants of Naboth, and Naboth was the eldest son of Ishmael, and they were just living just below the kingdom of Moab. And we got the Arabu tribes, they're all the Arabs. When we see right up further, northern up of Israel, we got Aram. Aram was the son of Shem. And these people, they knew their fathers well. Aram was the son of Shem for many, many hundreds of years, but well over 1,000 years. And they're still familiar with their father, since the time of Israel, when Syria was actually dwelling up north there. And they always were. Syrians always were. Syria was Aram was their father. He was the son of Shem. And eventually they also become Arabs as well as. Now, one of the things I might want to show you is about the kingdom of Moab and Ammon. So that's the interesting kingdom, where they are today. That's the thing. So let's have a look. Now, bringing you back into the nation of Israel, obviously we got Moab and Ammon. As I said, they were the two sons of Lot, and Lot was the nephew of of Abraham. And when they came out of Egypt in Genesis chapter 13, and Lot have these thoughts in his head to live somewhere nice, and somewhere comfortable, perhaps somewhere greenery, somewhere that is rich, so he can run his own business, if you like. He can live a happy life. And he look over Jordan. It was green and healthy and a good ground to plant and to and to do his life and his families and so on. But one of the two interesting things that he asks, they had a child, aren't they? Him and his uncle, Abraham. Abraham said to Lot, if you're going to decide to go left, I'll go right. But if you go right, I'll go left. And then he ended up finding himself in Jordan, and but not knowing. Some years later down the line, he ended up running into trouble because he was living among a very worldly, very wicked Sodom and Gomorrah area, and that's what that was his choice. But the Lord saved him out of that, wasn't he? Apart from his wife was turned into a pillar of salt when the Lord poured brimstone upon Sodom and Gomorrah. But he ended up have two sons through his daughters, and the eldest one was Moab, and the youngest one was Benini. Benini, in the end, his name was changed into Ammon. Now, if you look into modern day Jordan, the capital of Jordan today is Amman. Amman means Ammon. So these people know their fathers quite well. And if you do a bit of research in the Jordan land, after the time of the British mandate, we're going to look into that in a moment. And you can see that obviously it's rare to identify Moab, but one of the largest museums in Jordan today, it's called the Museum of Moab. And there's also a town in Jordan called Ma'an, which relates back to their fathers Moab. And so we see there is a connection. We know that they were different race of people, the Moabites and the Ammonites. But again, they all come from the same stock. But as time developed, they all tend to be Arabs. So we're going to look into that later in a moment. And he talks about here in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, he says talking about the kingdom in the book of Daniel, which is the Roman Empire. He says, "They'll enter also into the glorious land, and he says, he'll overthrow." And he talks about here that this nation will be escaped. So he's talking about Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon, and that was around about 534 BC. So he's talking about here when the Roman in 63 BC, and we got the general of the Roman army, or the Roman general called Pompey. I can't remember whether that's his first name or second name, but he was the one who went to take control Jerusalem, led by him. He was living on the north part of Africa, which is part of the Roman Empire. But 63 BC, that's when Israel was taken by the Romans. We're not talking about 70 AD because that's a different time altogether, with Titus taking down the temple. But we're talking about here when they first take control of Israel. And he's talking about this bloodshed happened and here and there. And this nation, he talks about clearly here that they escape. When you look into the scriptures, you can't identify where they move into. Where they're up to today. We're very familiar with Edom, which is Israel, but we're talking about here two nations, Moab and the Ammonites. The question I can ask, where are they today? So just thinking about identifying all these nations of this world and where they're today, we're thinking about the time of the Arab Empire and so on, and looking back into the movement of all these people that will become to be the enemy of Israel. And all of a sudden we find them in modern day in modern day Middle East, they're still very much there. So let's have a look back in some of the example, because the Bible did say later on in the next slide that they will return, the Moabites and the Ammonites. So let me put you some of the example here. If we are claiming that the Jews have now returned, in the 1917, they were given by the British of their homeland. They did return, aren't they? Because God did say that they will. So they return back after their captivity. We've heard about the lost 10 tribes of Israel. God did say to them that they will regather back elsewhere, not Israel, but in another land. So it's very easy to identify all these nations, but what about other nations? Because it says in Jeremiah chapter 33, talking to Israel, and I will cause the captivity of Judah and the captivity of Israel to return, and will build them as at the first. So we see that after the 7-time punishment of Israel and Judah returned back to Israel after 2,520 20 years, that's prophetical years. And they did return back since they were taken away by the Babylonian, beginning of the 7-time punishment. And we see that the northern isles, they were taken out first by the Assyrians, and they were shifted through the nation. And then they didn't return back to Israel, because God didn't say to them, they returned back to Israel. The only people that return is the Jews, but Israel returned back to the British Isles. They went back and coming into Britain as Anglo-Saxons and Danes and Jutes and all these, and they're coming in, fulfilling that prophecy in itself. Regather them back. And just a little tip for you tonight before we go further. So we see that thinking about the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan was the first covenant, the first promised land, to Israel. And then second, talking about the 10 tribes, second, it's Great Britain. And then we see that there is a connection between Israel today, American Britain, and the Jews. And third, there will be no covenant, there will be no promised land, and the third, it will be the kingdom of God. So that's just a little tip, just to sort of clarify the movement of this view. So we know to identify where they are. The Bible does also said that God will regather Egypt as well, the Egyptians. The Egyptians were taken away by the Assyrians. After Assyrians taken away the Israelis, and they shifted them through the nation, they all eye down on Egypt, and they've taken them also to captivity. But God did said he will return them back to Egypt. Likewise, also, we're talking about the Iran or Elam, because Elam becomes to be the Persian, and then eventually becomes to be modern day Iran. So again, he was the descendants of Shem. So we see that his descendants are living and eventually become to be the Persian, and they take away Israel as well, take control of Israel, the Persian and the Medes. And then God did said also here, they were taken away somewhere. They're having wars with other nations on the time. But God did said that he will bring them back again. So you see, it's just a sort of a clear insight, just to identify when God said something, and then he will did it. And we can see these nations is very much identical today. But the question is, what happened to Moab and Ammon? God did said that he will regather them back again. And he talks about here, when I will bring again the captivity of Moab in the later day, says the Lord. And also repeated again, also his brother Ammon. And afterward, I'll bring again the captivity of the children of Ammon, says the Lord. And that's sort of giving us an overview how the Ammonites, the Ammonites and the Moabites, obviously I mentioned about the capital of Jordan and some other towns and roads and so on, named after all these the Moabites and the Ammonites. And likewise also Israel, on his movement, they leave their traits, Sunday. For example, like Dan, he left his traits, all over Denmark and all these other places that we look up through the movement of the lost 10 tribes. And likewise also we can see here how God have actually regathered back these people for a reason, because the interesting thing that you can identify in 598 BC, this is the time when Jeremiah is speaking about the captivity, that they will return. And then you add it up in 1922, which is the mandate of the British Mandate, which is started on around about 1917, when Israel given the land of Israel back to the Jews. And obviously all these Arab nation on the time, they become independent. So as I said, 2,520 years is the prophetic year. As I said before in the beginning, we always touch about Isaac and Jacob and their movement and the 7-time punishment, and this sort of timeline applies to them. But guess what? When we look up in the scriptures, it also applies to some of the prophecy that God's spoken about these people too. Because God did said about Ishmael, he will bless him and make him to a mighty nation, just like the same thing he blesses Jacob as well, the grandson of Abraham. So there's a reason why it's all set in concrete, because God has drawing all these things for a reason. Now, as we can see here, the nation of the Middle East nation, and again in Genesis chapter 17, speaking to Ishmael again. And as for Ishmael, I've heard thee, behold, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful, and I will multiply him exceedingly. Tall prince shall beget, as we see that on the first slide, and I will make him a great nation. When we're talking about nation, what it meant here, it meant massing troop of locusts. Now in Revelation chapter 9, it talks about the rise of Muhammad and Islam, and they will move like a locust. The locusts always move like a huge amount of group, and they consume, they invade, in whatever way they take control and they grasp it. And that's how it works throughout history, the movement of the Arabs and the religion of Islam by Prophet Muhammad. And then this is just a slide, a picture of the British Mandate. You may be familiar with this. So thinking about the time when Jeremiah talks about when the Lord spoke of the return of the Moabites and the Ammonites. And then this is all, we see that the French, they were in control up the north, the Gola and the Lebanon. There's so many things that happen here. The British, they're also very much in control of most part of the Middle East. And so since 1917, you know, when Isaiah the prophet talks about the birds flying, as birds flying in Isaiah 33, I think it was, when the British, as I said before, give Israel the homeland of the Jews, and not later on after that, 1922, thinking about 598 BC, fits in really well when the return of the Ammonites and the Moabites back into their land. They knew their history, they knew their father. Likewise, also all these other Arab nations, they all split up their boundaries, and they settle where they are to be because they know their history, you know. And the Jews, as I said before, the Jews in the 70 AD, if you like, there's a lot of bloodshed and things that happen. The Jews suffers quite a huge amount of things in their lives, women and children and people scattered all over the place. But the Jews was all scattered all this place. Majority of them was taken away by Babylonian for many years back. You know, but later on after that, we got around about 50 Jews were told to return to rebuild the temple. And since all that time of Nehemiah, I think it was back in 445 BC, and until, you know, for many other empires have come and go, the Roman Empire, the Arab Empire, the Greek. The Jews, most of those Jews has been scattered and been grown, and they're living among all these other race of people, you know, the Arabs, you know, mainly, and not until 1917, First World War, and this is all been granted. All the Jews living in Arabs, they were told to return as well to their homeland. Likewise, also worldwide, we got many Jews living Germany, living all these many part of Europe since 1917, lead up to 1940. They went back to their country, but the Arabs hate it. The Arabs doesn't like it. And they are not very happy with it since all these things happen. But God did say that they will return as well to the Jews, and likewise also to the Arabs, as in talking about Ammon and Moab. They are now the Arabs today. Okay, so let's have a look in a couple of other slides. Now, history repeated itself, of course. In Psalm 83, verse 4, it says, they have said, come and let us cut them off for being a nation. Who are they? There were the Ishmaelites. There were the Edomites. There were the Moabites. There were the Ammonites. There were all these other Amorites, all the enemies that are dwelling outside Israel, the Syrians, all these other countries, and they never give up. Since then, until now, they never give up. They still want to take control of Israel. They never give. No wonder why we still have war between the Palestinians today and the Jews. The Palestinians are the Arabs. They are the Arabs. The Syrians are the Arabs. The Lebanon up in the north, they are the Arabs. They're surrounded by all the Arab countries. Where do they come from? They come from Ishmael. And they know their roots. They know their father well. So these people are not handling the matter, not knowing what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. Likewise, the Jews as well. But the question is, what about the 10 tribes? The 10 tribes got no clue in what we're talking about tonight. And they've got no clue about their origin either. That's sad, isn't it? But these people, they know them well. It's the history that repeated itself. It's ongoing and going and going. We see that in 1948, not long after 1922, since the mandate of the British mandate, they're still unhappy. There was a war. We got the Jordan army. We got the Saudi Arabian army. We got the Syrian army, the Egyptian army. They all came in and they want to push Israel out. 1948. Very interesting. And then in 1967, the Six-Day War, they come back again. And it only lasted for about 6 days. But most of these wars, they were supported by the British. 1967, particularly, the British have to send a huge amount of ammunition to the Israelis, tanks and weapons. History talks about it. So we see there is a connection between Manasseh, Ephraim, and the Jews. There's a strong connection. They're still very much connected today. Because Manasseh and Ephraim, perhaps they might have a glimpse and understanding. They were surrounded by their neighbors, the Arabs, but they got no clue what we're talking about tonight. They got no clue at all. But we know what we're talking about, don't we? Because we know our Bibles. We know how to identify these people and how they move and where they are today. And it's actually it's a basic thing, but it's quite a fascinating thing to identify. How Ishmael is still on the move. We're not talking about Esau and Jacob here, but there's another story as well. But it's all connected together. But this is mainly, as I said, the Jews and Ishmael and his descendants. Some of the interesting little accounts of why is a two nation, why is always one hated the other, because there's always been the same. Edom is his main allies is Moab and Ammon, and they've always been together no matter what. And it's a situations that has been going on for since back then in history. When Nehemiah was trying to build the temple, and he did build it in the end, and he had his enemy, wasn't he? And the enemy was the Horonite, which is believed to be the descendants of Ishmael, and we got the Ammonite, and we got the Arabian, the Ishmaelites. So we see that there is a constant problem going on over and over again. Solomon, I quoted briefly in the beginning. He ended up married the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Zidonites. These all became Arabs today. And God did set them to go. Don't get involved with these people. Let them be. I'll deal with them. But the downfall of Israel, because of the disobedience, they think they're clever enough. They can handle things in their own way, but it becomes to be a disaster. And it's still a disaster today, though. In Genesis chapter 16, and he said, and he will be a wild man. So obviously we see a movement. And his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand will against him. He shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So his brethren, and that relates to the Jews, of course. And we see that the Arab nation, that's the Arab nation in green, and Israel, just like on the very, very red one in the middle. And we couldn't see Palestine there. Palestine is on the coast in Gaza, the capital. We couldn't see on the map, but Palestine, or the Palestinians, used to be the Philistines. The Philistines dwell there, and eventually the Arabs take it. So the Philistines was one of the, they were from the descendants of Ham. They were living in this area for quite a long length of time before they all become Arabs. And today they call Palestine, because the area used to call Palestine. Obviously, first was called Canaan, and then it was Israel, and then it was Palestine, was named after by the Arabs, and then it changed back to Israel since the Jews returned back there because they knew it was their homeland. So we see that just like back in the old days, they were surrounded by the enemies. Nothing has changed. But Ishmael is still going to be the wild man, his descendant. Now, you may have actually recalled in 2017, just coming a little bit forward now, a few years ago, when Donald Trump, he made a national official document that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. You may have actually heard this in the news, and even today, right now, they still the Prime Minister of the British Prime Minister was making a comment about Jerusalem. He well supported that. That was just a recent thingy that came in last week about the situation that happened back then in 2017 by Donald Trump, that he made officially that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. But it creates a lot of problems in the Middle East. We got Turkey got drawn into, we got Iran got drawn into, and we got Russia was above it all as well on top. In Jeremiah chapter 8, he says, we look for peace, but no good came, and for the time of health, behold, trouble. One of the comment that King David said in Psalm 120, he says that I sojourn in Meshech, and then I dwell in Kedar. What it actually meant is, it meant he's not encouraging people to go to Kedar, to go and get involved with them and perhaps import and export. This is his comment back then, because he learned from the war he faced with the enemies that was encouraged by the Arabs. The word Arab mentioned quite a few times in the Bible, and obviously there is a connection connected right back to Ishmael, because that's where the Arabs came. But when David was ruling over after Saul, and he did encourage Israel, don't get too close to the Arabs, because he says in that scriptures, woe is me. In other words, don't get involved with the Arabs. He says that because he used his son Kedar. Kedar is Ishmael, and he's very true today. When any nation involves with the Arabs, you got to watch out, because it's not the fact that that they are a powerful nation too. They are a wealthy nation too, the Arabs, because God did say that in terms of Ishmael. And here, the situation here, for many years since Jim Carter, the president of America, he got Clinton, and they've always gone the Middle East backwards and forwards, tried to solve the situation in the Palestinians for many years to bring peace, but they couldn't find any peace. The more they talk about peace, the more trouble happened. And that's what the Americans tried to solve in the Middle East. And even today, it doesn't change anything. As I said, in the last few years ago, they did try, and Jerusalem, obviously we know it is a capital of of Israel. We know that, and the Jews knows it. But what did Turkey said? He says that the leader of Turkey said, declare that Jerusalem in Turkey's, in this city, which have had to live tears during the First World War, it is possible to come across trace of the Ottoman resistance. So Jerusalem is our city, a city for us. He's saying that because they once ruled Jerusalem, aren't they? But obviously, the history of Jerusalem, it belongs to Israel. And Jerusalem has always been the cup of trembling, and is still a cup of trembling today. Jerusalem is the city of God, of course, city of David, city of God. It's where Jesus was descended, where the Holy Spirit was poured out. The church started at Jerusalem, and Christ will return in Jerusalem. That's how it's all. And now the Arabs are claiming, because they've got their own, since the time of Muhammad, he built the Dome of the Rock there. We got the Dome of the Rock in the center of Jerusalem, and we got the Christian Orthodox. They were there as well. I mean, not the fact that I'm calling them Christian, because Christian is us. They're just an Orthodox Christian religion, if that's the right term. And he also got the Jews as well. So all these three religions, they're fighting over this place. And but we see that it all belongs to God. Jesus Christ will return. He will reign from Jerusalem and the church. And that's how he set it up. And we see that this ongoing problem between Ishmael and his brethren is an ongoing matter. It hasn't finished, but it will be finished one day. And talking about the Moab, one of the reasons why they've always been don't like Israel, and they pushed Gad. Gad was one of the son of Jacob. His inheritance was actually right into the land of Ammon, and Ammon and Moab doesn't like it, and they have to push him out, and they create wars in the time. But he says, I've heard the reproach of Moab and the revelings of the children of Ammon, whereby they have reproached my people and magnified themselves against their border. And it's the same situation that happened in Israel today. We've got the Palestinians, they're all Arabs. When we're talking about Moab and Ammon here, we're talking about the Arabs, because that's all where it's all connected. And there's still a situation, the Palestinians, they're still having situations, they're throwing stones and bullets and firing weapons and so on. It's an ongoing situation. The United Nations can't even control it. They're just barking like a dog. They can't do anything. No any other king of this leader of this world can solve the Middle East crisis, but it's only Jesus will come and repair all the stuff, because he will come back as the King of Kings and Lords of Lords. So this is a common situation. It's history, it's biblical, and it's also talking about leads to the future to come. Now the next part of the final part is getting serious now. It's going to be Esau and his allies. Okay, so we've looked into the part one, and then we come down to the descendants of Shem and Ham, and obviously Japheth, and then we coming through down to the nation of Israel and their enemies, and we look into Abraham, and we're dwelling on Isaac and Ishmael and the nations that represent and so on, and the Arabs today. And now we're going to, for the next final part, is going to be Esau and his allies. This is a great subject, just to see how Esau fit into the Arabs, and how the world have become very collapsed than ever, and leading up to the nuclear war that will finish up the whole entire, obviously the area or the region or whatever, only God knows, to fulfill the return of the Lord for the church to be raised up. Okay, so Esau and his allies for the third part and the final part. Amen.